The phone slipped from my hand and hit the wooden floor with a hollow thud. My daughter's voice still echoed in my ear, sharp as glass. Mom, the money you've been keeping all these years, we've already counted it. It isn't really yours anymore. For a moment, the room tilted. The porcelain cup of tea in my other hand trembled, a brown ripple spilling over the rim and staining the saucer. My heart thudded against my ribs, louder than the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. I am Marianne, 62, once a restorer of stained glass windows in the old churches of Lyon. I used to spend my days bending over colored shards, fitting them into patterns that turned sunlight into music. Yet nothing prepared me for the sound of my own daughter slicing me open with a single sentence. The silence that followed was unbearable. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of the curtains against the window frame. Every little noise seemed amplified, as if the house itself held its breath, waiting for my reaction. My lips parted, but no words came out. Only the metallic taste of betrayal filled my mouth. I bent down slowly, fingers shaking, and picked up the phone. The screen lit up with her name, Sophie. My Sophie, who once clutched my hand so tightly at night, afraid of monsters. "Say something, Mom," she urged on the line. Her voice was calm, almost businesslike. "It's better for everyone if you just agree. You don't need so much anymore." I pressed the phone against my ear, but the words turned into a low buzz, like bees swarming in a jar. My throat closed. All I could manage was a whisper, half to her, half to myself. "So this is what I am to you." I set the cup down carefully, afraid that if I let it slip, it would shatter like the pieces of glass I once worked with. My hands that had held centuries-old windows steady, were trembling uncontrollably now. The afternoon light fell across the carpet in pale stripes, yet the air felt cold, sterile, like the stone nave of a church before Mass. I wanted to scream, but the sound died inside me. In that instant, a single realization seared through my chest. To my own children, I was no longer their mother. I was nothing more than a breathing vault, a safe that could be emptied at will. On the shelf above my desk sits a small wooden box, carved with curling vines and faded roses. Its lid creaks when I lift it, and the scent of old paper escapes like a ghost. Inside lie the bank passbooks, neatly stacked, the ink fading from years of thumbprints and nervous counting. That box is not just wood and hinges. It is the weight of my entire life. Every time I touch it, I tumble backward through years. I see myself 35, hair tied back, gloves pulled tight, standing under the fluorescent buzz of the glass workshop. Midnight shifts blurred into dawns. My fingers sliced open more times than I could count. Blood mixing with powdered lead as I pieced together fragments of stained glass. Back then, I earned €800 a month after rent and taxes. I sent most of it home, straight into school fees, shoes, groceries. Some years, by sheer will and the refusal to buy myself anything beyond soap and bread, I managed to save €35,000. That sum wasn't just numbers on a page. It was the violin Sophie wanted, the dental surgery for Julian, the rent I never once asked them to help pay. I remember winter of 1999. The electricity bill arrived, €85. I kept the receipt folded in a plastic bag inside my coat pocket because the rain wouldn't stop and I feared the ink would smudge. My fingers were numb from carrying panes of glass through the snow, but I told myself, as long as the lights stay on, the children won't know the cold I carry inside me. The wooden box entered my life that same year. It was given by an old priest after we restored a cathedral window. "For safekeeping," he said, pressing it into my hands. I ran my palm over its carvings, the roses rough beneath my skin. It became my vault. Every euro, every sacrifice slipped inside like prayers unspoken. I thought, if I keep building this box brick by invisible brick, one day my children will look at me and see not just a provider, but a mother who gave them the world. But memory is cruel. For every tender image, there is another that burns. Sophie, 16, wrinkling her nose when she hugged me after work. You smell like metal, Mama. Couldn't you change before picking me up? It was a small remark, tossed like a pebble. Still, it struck deep. I laughed it off, though inside I wondered if love was already turning conditional. Julian, at university, once asked over dinner, "Why don't you just sell the house and move somewhere smaller? You don't need space. You're alone most evenings." I stirred the soup and told myself it was practicality, not greed. I ignored the hollow ache his words left behind. I worked harder. I told myself, if I sacrifice now, they will never doubt my love. Nights bled into years. The glass workshop became my second home. The smell of resin, the clatter of frames, the sting of turpentine. I kept track of everything. Dates, sums, sacrifices. September 2004, Sophie's conservatory tuition, €3,200. April 2006, Julian's semester abroad, €6,000. Christmas 2010, both children's flights home, €1,400. I never complained. Instead, I slipped another bank slip into the wooden box, its lid shutting with a dull click. I see myself on the kitchen floor one night, patches on my sleeves, bills spread out like cards. The lamp flickered. My body begged for rest. Still, I whispered, "Endure. One day they will thank you." And yet, somewhere along the line, the tone of their voices shifted. Requests became expectations. Gratitude thinned into entitlement. I noticed it first in the way Sophie stopped saying please. Then, in Julian's silence when I handed him cash, foreshadowing, though I didn't call it that at the time, just shadows growing on the wall. I kept pouring pieces of myself into that box, as if money could guarantee love, as if euros could shield me from loneliness. Looking at it now, scratched, heavy, still smelling faintly of incense, I want to laugh. I believed devotion had an exchange rate, that my children would see the bleeding fingertips, the long nights, and translate them into tenderness. But I was wrong. I whispered to the box, though no one hears. I thought sacrifice would buy gratitude. I thought love was a debt they would repay. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. The lid shuts with a dull echo, and I feel the past closing in around me. I see myself young again, barely 30, hair messy from the wind, stomach growling after a double shift. On the table lay a single loaf of bread, dry at the edges, its crust cracking like old paint. I tore it in half and handed the larger piece to Sophie. She frowned. "No, Mama, you eat too." I shook my head, pushing it closer to her lips. "I'm not hungry." It was a lie. My insides ached. But the sound of her chewing filled me with more warmth than food ever could. She leaned forward suddenly, arms thin but strong, and wrapped herself around my neck. Her hair smelled faintly of chalk dust from school. "You're my superhero, Mama." The words sank into me, brighter than any stained glass window I had ever restored. For a moment, poverty was nothing but background noise. That night, after Sophie fell asleep, I opened the wooden box. Back then, it wasn't filled with bank slips. It was a hiding place for old letters, yellowed paper tied with a ribbon, dreams I'd written to a man I once loved, long before the children. I slipped the ribbon aside and placed the last coins of the week inside. I whispered into the dark, "One day, this box will save us." I had no idea that the same box would one day feel like a tomb, heavy with the weight of my sacrifices. It was an ordinary dinner, nothing special, just stew simmering on the stove, steam fogging the window. Julian spooned food onto his plate in silence, then cleared his throat. "Mom," he asked almost casually, "who will you leave the house to when the time comes?" The question struck like a sudden draft through the room. My spoon froze midair. The clink of cutlery against porcelain felt louder than usual. I forced a smile, though my stomach tightened. "Why do you ask something like that?" "I'm still here." Julian shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Just wondering. It's good to plan ahead." I looked down at the stew. the potatoes floating like small pale islands. My heart beat too fast. A part of me wanted to ask if he saw me as a burden already, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I told myself, he's just being practical. I shouldn't overthink. Still, as I cleared the dishes, I noticed how his eyes lingered on the framed photo above the mantel, the one of the house itself, taken the day I bought it with 20 years of savings. That night, I sat by the wooden box, fingertips tracing its carved roses. For the first time, it didn't feel like protection. It felt like a target. I didn't know then, but that question was only the first warning. The family gathered for Sophie's birthday. Laughter, clinking glasses, the smell of roasted chicken. For a while, I let myself believe everything was normal. Then, Sophie's husband, Mark, cleared his throat. He placed his fork down with a soft but deliberate clatter. If you truly care about us, Marianne, you'll sign the transfer. Give the money to the children now. You don't really need it anymore. The room went silent. Even the clock seemed to pause. I felt my ears ring, a sharp buzzing that drowned every other sound. My hands shook so hard that the knife slipped from my grip and hit the plate with a metallic clang. It sounded like a gavel slamming down in a courtroom. Sophie avoided my eyes, staring at her wine glass. Julian shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. I wanted to speak, to shout. Instead, my body betrayed me. I sat frozen, lips trembling, breath shallow. The words hung in the air like daggers. You don't need it anymore. In my mind, the wooden box split open. I saw it not as carved roses, but as cracks, jagged lines across my chest. Every euro I had hidden inside turned into shards of glass, slicing through the memory of that loaf of bread, through Sophie's voice calling me superhero. I thought, is my silence the same as agreement? Is every year of sacrifice reduced to a signature on their paper? No one noticed my tears sliding down. Or maybe they did and chose to look away. That night, alone in my room, I pressed my hand to the lid of the wooden box. Its carvings dug into my palm like thorns. And in that moment, I understood. My silence had become an unlimited check they could cash whenever they pleased. It was a Tuesday morning, unremarkable in every way. The kettle whistled, steam curling into the quiet kitchen. The curtains swayed with the draft. Yet in that ordinariness, I felt something collapse inside me. I sat at the table, the wooden box before me. Its carved roses were dulled by years of touch, petals worn smooth by my restless fingers. I traced the lines absent-mindedly, and for the first time, it did not feel like comfort. It felt like a weight chained to my chest. My reflection in the window startled me, pale, eyes hollow. I hardly recognized the woman staring back. Was this what remained of Marianne, the woman who once climbed scaffolds to repair stained glass 30 meters above ground, who once bent colored light into harmony? A whisper rose in me, sharp and relentless. If I sign tomorrow, what will be left of me? If I give them everything, what will I live on? If my worth is only measured in money, what happens when the money runs out? What dignity will remain when I can no longer buy their love? Each question struck like a hammer against my ribs. I opened the box. Inside, passbooks stacked neatly, numbers printed in fading ink. Every digit was a scar earned by nights without sleep, by hunger disguised as thrift, by wounds covered in bandages so I could keep working. My hand hovered over them. For years, I had treated this ritual with reverence, counting, adjusting, preparing for their future. But now my hand trembled with rage. I slammed the lid shut. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. My breath came fast, chest heaving. I stood, walked to the safe in the corner, inserted the key, turned it. The click echoed in my bones. I placed the wooden box inside and locked it away. My fingers shook, but this time not from weakness, from resolve. Next, I walked to the desk. The bank's transfer orders lay neatly arranged. I had signed them months ago. automatic payments flowing quietly into accounts that were no longer mine to control. I grabbed the papers, ripped them down the middle, then again into shreds. The sound of tearing paper was like music, jagged and liberating. I called the bank. My voice wavered at first, but steadied with each word. Cancel all standing orders. Effective immediately. The clerk asked for confirmation twice. My hand clutched the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. Yes, I repeated, cancel everything. When I hung up, the silence of the house felt different. Not heavy, not suffocating. Empty, yes. But an emptiness I could finally breathe in. Still, the fear came crawling up my spine. What if they hate me? What if they never speak to me again? What if I end my days alone, punished for this act of defiance? I pressed my palm flat against the safe, feeling the cold steel beneath my skin. Then another thought surfaced. And what if I don't? What if I sign away the last of myself? The image flashed clear. Me, hollow-eyed, stripped of dignity, a guest in my own life, a mother reduced to a line item. I would rather face solitude than live like that. Something hardened inside me. My breath slowed, my hands steadied, the trembling stopped. For 62 years, I had been many things. Daughter, mother, worker, provider, but never had I chosen myself. Now I did. For the first time in my life, I said it aloud in the stillness of the room, I choose me. And as the words left my mouth, I felt it, not victory, not joy, but a strange, fierce calm. For the first time in my life, I chose to keep something for myself. The silence came first. For days, neither Sophie nor Julian called. My phone, once buzzing with requests and reminders, lay mute on the counter. When the screen finally lit up, it was only a message, short, sharp, cold. Mom, I'm very disappointed in you. No greeting, no farewell. Just that. I stared at it until the letters blurred. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, searching for a reply, an apology, an explanation, anything that would soften the blow. But what words could I send that wouldn't undo everything I had just chosen? I put the phone face down. The silence returned, heavier now, like a blanket pressing against my chest. At night, the house amplified every sound. The tick of the clock on the mantelpiece, the creak of the stairs as I climbed them, even the whisper of my slippers against the floor. Each step felt like walking underwater, slow and weighted. I began to notice their absence in the smallest ways. No quick calls asking for bank details. No polite but urgent reminders about tuition, bills, mortgages. Instead, a distance that stretched wider with every hour. When Sophie finally did call, her voice was clipped, distant. "How are you, Mom?" Her words felt like ice water, polite but void of warmth. "I'm fine," I answered. A pause, then a sigh. "If you say so." The line went dead before I could gather courage to say more. In the kitchen, the wooden box sat locked away, but its presence lingered in my mind like a shadow. I imagined them picturing it too, counting, calculating, resenting. The tension seeped into everything. Even the air felt brittle, as if one sharp word could shatter it. One evening, I caught sight of Julian standing at the end of the driveway. He didn't knock, didn't come in, just stood there for a few seconds, staring at the house, then turned and left. The echo of his footsteps on the gravel lingered long after he disappeared. I closed the curtains, heart pounding. The calm stretched on, but it was not peace. It was the hush before thunder, the stillness that makes you hold your breath because you know the air is about to break. I lit a candle one night, letting the flame dance against the dark. My reflection flickered in the glass. I whispered to it, "I've made my choice. I can't turn back now." But even as I spoke, I felt the storm pressing closer, heavy clouds gathering where I could not see. And deep inside, I knew the truth. The storm was coming. The knock at the door was sharp, deliberate. When I opened it, Julian stood there, not alone. Beside him, a man in a dark suit carried a leather briefcase. My stomach dropped. We entered the living room. The place that once smelled of lavender polish now reeked of tension. The coffee table bore a neat stack of papers, placed there by the stranger before he even sat down. The sound of the chair creaking as he settled felt like a crack through the air. I glanced at the folder. Crisp white sheets, black ink, too official to ignore. Julian avoided my eyes at first, running a hand through his hair. "Mom, this is just a formality," he said softly. The lawyer's pen clicked open. I folded my hands to keep them from trembling. "What is it?" Julian exhaled, sat straighter. "A power of attorney. If you sign, things will be easier. For you, for all of us." I looked at the papers, then back at my son. The boy I once carried on my shoulders now sat across from me, eyes hardened. "I won't sign," I said. My voice was low, steady. Julian's jaw tightened. "Don't be selfish. Don't you love us anymore?" I felt something twist inside me. Love had been my compass, my burden, my excuse. Now it was being twisted into a weapon. "Love," I whispered, "is not a loan to be repaid." The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Madam, this is simply to ensure your assets are managed responsibly." Is protection, really? Protection. The word stung. I had protected them my whole life, and now they framed my independence as recklessness. Julianne leaned forward, voice sharper. "If you cared, you'd do this for us. Why make it so difficult?" My hands gripped the armrests. "Difficult?" I repeated. "I worked nights for years so you could study, so you could live without fear. And you call me difficult?" His cheeks flushed. He glanced at the lawyer, then back at me. "You're being dramatic. It's just paper." I pushed the folder back across the table. The pen rolled off and clattered to the floor. The sound echoed like a verdict. "No," I said again. Julian's voice broke into a shout. "Then maybe you don't deserve our help when you're old and useless." The words struck harder than any slap. For a moment, the room spun. My breath caught, but my voice rose clear, cutting through the air. "Enough." I stood. My legs trembled, but my spine felt steel. I looked him in the eye. The same eyes that once begged me to chase monsters from under his bed. "I am not your wallet. I am not your safety net. I am not a crying purse you can empty at will." The silence that followed was unbearable, yet freeing. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, gathering his papers. Julian's face twisted. Anger, shame, disbelief mingled together. He grabbed the folder, snapped it shut, and rose. "You'll regret this, Mom," he muttered. The door slammed behind them, the echo rattling the picture frames on the wall. I sank into the chair. My hand still shook, but in my chest, a fire burned steady. For the first time, I wasn't pleading or excusing or apologizing. For the first time, I had said no and meant it. I was no longer a crying purse. The envelope arrived on a Thursday, pale and official, its window showing my name in a font too clean to be kind. My fingers were cold when I took it from the postman. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Inside, a summons, a claim that I was no longer competent to manage my finances, and a request for immediate conservatorship. The words leapt from the page like teeth. I sat down at the kitchen table. The kettle hissed, then clicked off, steam ghosting the room. I didn't pour the tea. I was listening to the sudden change in the house's breathing. It felt as if my home had swallowed something sharp. By 10 o'clock, the neighborhood knew. Curtains twitched. Madame Cecile from across the lane paused at my gate, pretended to fix the strap of her handbag, then hurried away. At the bakery, whispers rose and fell when I stepped inside. I ordered 2 baguettes and left them untouched on the counter when I got home. The paper bag smelled of yeast and pity. That afternoon, I called a number written in the corner of my old address book, Laurent M. Roche, a lawyer I had met years ago when we restored a chapel window he helped fund. He had been kind then, quiet, with soft eyes and a voice like worn wool. He answered on the second ring. "Marianne, they filed, Laurent." A pause. Come tomorrow. 9 sharp. Bring everything you have. Everything. I looked at the safe, then at the wooden box behind its steel door. I slept with the light on. The next morning, Laurent's office smelled faintly of varnish and lemon. He was older now, hair thinner, but his gaze hadn't changed. He didn't rush me. I arranged the passbooks on his desk like relics. He touched nothing until I finished speaking. I handed him the summons. He read it once, then again, slower. They're claiming you're impaired, he said at last. And they've attached affidavits. From whom? A general practitioner who hasn't examined you in 2 years. And a neighbor. He slid a stapled packet toward me. The statements were neat, polite, and false. The doctor wrote, patient shows signs of intermittent confusion. The neighbor wrote, often seen wandering the garden at unusual hours, appears forgetful. I laughed, and the sound startled me. I water the roses at dawn, I said. That's not confusion. That's summer. Laurent's mouth tugged at one corner. We will answer each point. But first, we will ground ourselves in facts. He turned to a fresh legal pad and numbered the page. Identity documents, medical evaluations, bank records, work history. I placed my identity card on the stack. For medical proof, I remembered the appointment June 30 this year. Blood pressure, reflexes, memory test. I recited 3 words, rose, window, salt, then repeated them after 10 minutes. The clinic receptionist, Elodie, had smiled. Everything fine, madam. Laurent nodded. We'll request the records directly, not via family. For the bank, I brought the passbooks and statements, September 2004, 3202, conservatory tuition, April 2006, 6,000 semester abroad, December 2010, Topple, 52 shift flights. Numbers that still burn my fingers when I touch them. I also had a notebook of transfers, dates, amounts, purpose. My handwriting betrayed the years. Steady at the start, cramped toward the end. Good, Laurent said. Your meticulousness is our witness. He leaned back. They will likely produce evidence of your confusion. Texts taken out of context. Perhaps a signature they'll say looks shaky. We counter with a timeline corroborated by third parties. Anyone who can speak to your work and faculties. I thought of Father Andre from the cathedral, now retired, and Luke, the foreman of the glass workshop, of Elodie at the clinic, of Madame Thuy at the corner store, who saw me calculate exact change every Tuesday. I'll ask them, I said. He folded his hands. And Marianne, there is something else. They may attempt a power of attorney retroactively, or waive a paper they claim you signed. My mouth went dry. I didn't. We'll be ready. He stood, slow and deliberate, and reached for the passbooks, not to count, but to weigh. He held them as if they were heavy with more than money. I know this feels like drowning, he said, but the tide is predictable. We'll swim it. When I left his office, the sky had turned a flat, threatening gray. I buttoned my coat. The city hummed with its usual noise, yet I felt transparent, like a figure painted on glass, light shining through my ribs. The blow landed 3 days later. A courier delivered a supplemental filing, additional exhibits. I recognized my own signature on one page, dated May 12 this year, on a limited authority form naming Julian as temporary manager during a health episode. I had never signed such a thing. The signature was close, too close. The tilt of the M, the long tail of the final E. But the R in my name had always been a tight hook. This one looped wide. I called Laurent immediately. He told me not to confront anyone, not yet. Bring it, he said, and breathe. At his office, he laid the page beside my passport signature, then the one on my bank card. He pulled a loop from a drawer and watched the ink's pressure. It's traced, he said softly, not free. I felt both relief and nausea. Will the court see it? We'll make sure they do. We worked in hours and cups of weak coffee. Laurent dictated, I answered, his assistant scanned and filed. We built a lattice of proof. The clinic's June 30 notes with cognitive assessment marked normal, time-stamped shop receipts showing me paying in cash and exact change. The workshop's April payroll with my signature on acceptance slips during restoration days. 2 security camera clips, one from May 12 showing me at the bakery at 9:14 a.m., another from the pharmacy at 9:37 a.m. signing for blood pressure medication. The forged document claimed I was in a health episode at 9:30 that very same morning. The dates aligned like teeth in a trap, but on our side. The world, meanwhile, pressed its petty weights upon me. At the market, a woman I knew from church leaned close and murmured, "I heard you're not well. Such a shame. But your children are doing the right thing, Nan." Her breath smelled of mint and judgment. I wanted to show her my receipts, my clinic notes, my hands. Instead, I smiled until my cheeks hurt and walked away. At home, I moved through rooms that suddenly felt like exhibits. My teacups sat like props. The wooden banister groaned under my hand with every ascent, each step a small rehearsal for the courtroom. And yet, in the quiet, there were glimmers. Luke, the foreman, called. "If they need proof you can work a pattern to the millimeter, I'll put a pane of glass and a cutter in front of the judge," he said. "You'll outperform half my apprentices." Father Andre sent a note on thick paper, his script a sober river. "I have watched you steady ladders 3 stories high, eyes sharp as any conservator's. Say the word, I will testify." At dusk, Madame Thunat, holding a small tin of sesame cookies. "I see you count change every Tuesday," she said simply. "I tell court if they ask." I cried after she left. Not because of the cookies, because of the sentence. "I tell court if they ask." A sentence shaped like a hand under my elbow. The other side moved quickly, almost elegantly. They produced bank screenshots that looked like mine, but weren't. A line of recurring gifts I had never set up, a note of intention, typed in a font I never use. They conjured text messages cropped so that my replies, "No, not now, we'll discuss later," read as confusion rather than boundaries. Laurent taught me to slow my breathing. "We answer with facts, not fury," he said. He drafted responses that felt like stepping stones over black water. He also asked me a question I wasn't prepared for. "If the court proposes a neutral review, cognitive, financial, will you agree?" I stared at him. Another test? Another stranger measuring me as if I were an untrustworthy instrument? "It would look confident," he added gently. "Because you are." I nodded. I was tired of being measured, but I was more tired of being misread. There were nights the fear arrived like weather and refused to pass. I would sit at the kitchen table, the summons folded in half, quarters, eighths, until the paper looked like something small enough to swallow. I imagined losing. I imagined signing forms I didn't believe in, watched by a clerk who didn't look up. I imagined key after key taken from my ring, the safe, the house, my name. I walked the garden instead. John was merciful there. Dew collected on the roses. I whispered the clinic's 3 words to myself like a prayer rose, window, salt, and then added a 4th, spine. On July 18, Laurent filed our answer in motion to dismiss the conservatorship request, attaching exhibits labeled with patient ordinary names. Grocery receipt, Rue de Fleur, 10:22 a.m. So that a judge, even a weary one, might see a life rather than a ledger. He also prepared for war. "If they press the forgery, we'll request a handwriting expert," he said. "And if they press the impaired claim, we'll bring your doctor and a court-appointed assessor. We will not overreach. We'll be steady." His steadiness was a metronome. I set my breath to it. The week before the hearing, Sophie called at last. Her voice was soft, almost the old one. "Mom?" "Yes, this is complicated." Silence. "It doesn't have to be," I said. "You could withdraw." A long inhale, a tiny click of her tongue against her teeth, childhood habits, carried into adulthood. "Mark says it's for your security." "Mark is not my son." I'd never said it aloud. The words shocked us both. She began to cry, then bit the sound back. I don't want to fight you, she whispered. Then don't, I whispered back. She hung up without answering. I sat there, phone cooling in my hand, and watched the sun move across the floorboards, light sliding like a verdict yet to be written. On the eve of the hearing, I opened the safe and took out the wooden box. The lid creaked, as it always had, the carved roses pressed against my fingertips. This time, I did not feel the old superstition, the urge to hide the box away from the world. I lifted the passbooks and laid them on the table one by one like testimonies. I wrote 3 lines on an index card and tucked it into my bag. June 3rd, clinic assessment, normal cognition, May 12, bakery at E9, 14. Pharmacy at 09037, no episode. S signature loop on R time mine. Facts, not fury. I practiced saying them aloud until my voice stopped shaking. I poured the untouched tea from the first day down the sink. The liquid ran brown, then clear. When I turned off the light, the house felt less haunted. The morning of court, Laurent met me on the steps. He offered his arm. I took it, not because I couldn't walk, but because it steadied the speed of my heart. Inside, the corridor smelled like paper and polished wood. People's lives shuffled past in folders. We sat on a hard bench. Across from us, Julian adjusted his tie. He didn't look at me. Mark murmured in his ear, hand on his shoulder as if coaching for a match. Sophie stood a little apart, worrying a loose thread on her sleeve. Laurent leaned toward me. Whatever happens in there, we will answer with truth, he said. Not with shame, not with fear. I nodded. I wasn't sure if I believed him until I looked down at my hands. They were steady. In my chest, a sentence formed and set like glass and lead. They may weaponize words to threaten me, but truth cannot be scrubbed out. The bailiff opened the door. Case of Roche versus Marianne, he called. I stood. And then a softer terror bloomed. What if truth is not enough? What if the court believes the smoother story over the truer one? The question followed me into the room like a shadow I could not shake. It happened by accident. I was folding laundry in the guest room when Sophie's handbag tipped over. A folder slipped out, scattering receipts and photocopies across the floor. I bent to gather them, but one page stopped me cold. A photocopy of a power of attorney. My name at the bottom, my signature, only it wasn't mine. The paper was cool in my hand, edges rough where the copier had bitten. I traced the curve of the M, too wide, the tail of the E, too long. It looked like me, but it wasn't. My heart pounded against my ribs. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly, each second a hammer. They forged me. They want me erased. This is how they mean to bury me alive. For a moment, the room blurred. I tasted metal at the back of my throat. My knees threatened to buckle. But then something inside me, something I thought had long ago withered, flared awake. I clutched the copy tighter, the paper crumpling beneath my grip. My hands shook, but my eyes sharpened. For the first time in weeks, they didn't blur with tears. I slipped the document into my own folder, hiding it beneath a pile of bills. I would not confront Sophie yet, not Julian, not Mark, not until I was ready. I whispered into the empty room, my voice steady though my chest was heaving. I will not let myself be erased so easily. Preparation became my new ritual. I spread documents across the dining table, bank slips, clinic notes, receipts stained with coffee rings, photographs of the workshop. Each page was a shard of my life, fragile yet sharp. Laurent guided me. Treat each document as a weapon, he said. Facts are blades. We polish them until they gleam. I stacked the bank statements in chronological order. The ink smelled faintly of dust and iron. I ran my fingers over dates. April 2006, December 2010, June 2023, as if they were mile markers on a long road I had walked barefoot. Friends came too. Luke from the workshop brought a photo of me balancing a pane of glass on scaffolding. If they doubt your steadiness, I'll show them this. Madame Thuy offered to testify about my weekly market visits. Exact change counted without hesitation. Father Andre wrote a letter in his elegant hand, vouching for my memory of liturgy and detail. Their support felt like hands pressing against my back, keeping me upright. At night, I stood before the mirror. At first, my voice cracked, the words catching in my throat. I worked nights for decades. I know where every euro went. I tried again, firmer. This is not confusion. This is sacrifice written in numbers. The mirror showed a woman whose mouth trembled, whose shoulders hunched. But repetition reshaped her. Each night, my voice steadied, my shoulders squared. I recorded myself, played it back, forced myself to hear the quaver, then practiced until it vanished. I remembered all the times I had stayed silent, when Sophie wrinkled her nose at my work clothes, when Julian hinted at selling the house, when Mark called my savings family money. Each silence had been a stone piled on my chest. Not this time. I lined my documents neatly, slid them into a binder. Closing it felt like sheathing a sword. My breath slowed. Before bed, I whispered at my reflection one last time. I no longer speak to beg. I speak to defend myself. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. White lights glaring overhead, bouncing off pale walls, flattening every shadow until there was nowhere to hide. The wooden benches creaked under the shifting weight of strangers, their whispers carried like drafts through the chamber. At the front, the judge adjusted his black robe and raised the gavel. The sharp crack against the block made me flinch. This was no longer my kitchen, no longer whispers behind curtains. This was public, this was war. I sat at the respondents' table beside Laurent. Across the aisle, Julien and Sophie. Julian's tie was knotted too tightly, his jaw clenched. Sophie kept her gaze on the table, fingers picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. Between them, Mark leaned back with smug ease, whispering into their lawyer's ear. The clerk called the case. The opposing lawyer rose, his voice polished, resonant. Your Honor, we are here because Marianne, though once capable, now demonstrates patterns of confusion and impaired judgment. Our petition is simple. For the safety of her assets and the well-being of the family, we ask that authority be granted to her son Julian through conservatorship. His words fell like smooth stones, crafted to sound reasonable. I gripped the edge of the table. Laurent placed a steadying hand on mine. The lawyer continued, presenting exhibits, a doctor's affidavit, a neighbor's statement, and finally, my supposed signature on the forged power of attorney. The paper gleamed under the fluorescent light, an impostor wearing my name. I wanted to shout, but Laurent rose calmly. Your Honor, the respondent contests both the facts and the inferences. We will show through evidence and testimony that Marianne remains fully competent and that these claims are built on fabrication. The duel had begun. The opposing lawyer called their first witness, the general practitioner. He mumbled through prepared lines. Yes, I recall she seemed forgetful. Laurent's cross-examination was gentle, almost kind. Doctor, when was your last examination of my client? 2 years ago. 2 years. Do you have any record of cognitive decline since then? No, not written. So your statement is not based on recent medical fact, but memory. The doctor shifted, eyes darting. Yes, I suppose. The judge scribbled something down, a fissure in their wall. Next came the neighbor. She testified I wandered the garden at odd hours, appearing lost. Laurent leaned forward. Madame, do you rise early yourself? I sometimes. So if you are awake at dawn, you see my client watering her roses? Yes. Roses which, as we all know, require watering at dawn in summer to avoid scorching. That is confusion? The courtroom chuckled softly. The neighbor flushed. Another crack. Then came the forged document. Their lawyer slid it forward like a weapon. Her own signature, Your Honor. Proof she entrusted authority to her son. Laurent stood, eyes bright. We will return to this. Laurent called Elodie, the clinic receptionist. She testified I attended an appointment on June 3rd, passed a memory test, and joked about remembering the words rose, window, salt. The judge allowed the note into record. Then Luke, foreman of the workshop, took the stand. His hands bore scars from years of glass cutting. I've watched her measure to the millimeter. Just last year, she cut panels straighter than my apprentices. That's not confusion. The courtroom grew quiet, respectful. Next, Madame Thu from the corner store. She spoke little. Every Tuesday, she pays exact change, not one coin wrong, always. The simplicity of her statement landed harder than pages of affidavits. Finally, Laurent returned to the forged document. He presented my passport and bank card signatures side by side. He handed the judge a magnified printout showing the wide loop of the R on the forgery. Your Honor, handwriting is like stained glass. Patterns reveal truth. This signature is not free, it is traced, and we will demonstrate it with time-stamped alibis. He displayed receipts, bakery at E0914, pharmacy at E0937, the very morning I was supposedly signing during a health episode. The judge leaned forward. The opposing lawyer fidgeted. But the hardest moment wasn't the forged paper. It was when Julien himself took the stand. He didn't look at me. His voice was clipped, rehearsed. My mother forgets things. She repeats herself. She keeps money locked away when it should help the family. She doesn't understand what's best anymore. Each sentence sliced me. My son, my boy who once pressed daisies into my hand and whispered, "Don't leave me, Mama," now declared me incompetent, unfit, a burden. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. When cross-examined, Laurent asked simply, "Julien, can you name the date of your mother's last medical exam?" Julien hesitated. "I don't recall." "Yet you claim she forgets." The silence was brutal. Finally, Laurent rose. "Your Honor, my client wishes to speak." I stood. My knees shook, but my voice rose from a place deeper than fear. Yes, I am 62. My hair is gray, my hands scarred, but I am not incapable. Every euro in those accounts I earned. I remember each cut on my palms, each night shift in the workshop. I saved for tuition, for rent, for food. I kept records because sacrifice deserves memory. They say this money is family money. No, it is my life pressed into numbers. They call my watering roses at dawn confusion. No, it is devotion. They weigh papers I never signed, signatures that wear my name like a mask. I am not here to beg for love, nor to cling to coins. I am here because without freedom, I am erased. I will not be erased. I am not a shadow signing under someone else's life. The chamber was silent. Even the air seemed to pause. The judge's words were measured, clipped, final. The petition for conservatorship is denied. The court finds the respondent competent and independent. All contested documents identified as unreliable. Assets remain under her sole authority. The gavel fell. The sound thundered through me, not as a threat, but as release. Julian's face collapsed, color draining. Sophie wept quietly, torn between sides she could no longer straddle. Mark whispered furiously at their lawyer. I sat down, breath trembling, eyes burning. But my chest was light. When we stepped outside, the sky was blinding blue. For weeks it had been gray, heavy with storms. Now sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps, warm against my skin. Laurent touched my shoulder. "It's done," I nodded. Tears slipped free, but they were different, no longer bitter. They tasted of salt and release. I inhaled long and deep, as if I hadn't drawn air in months. For the first time in years, I smiled. Not wide, not triumphant, just enough to feel the corners of my mouth remember joy. The chains had fallen. I was free. When I returned home, the house was too quiet. The clamor of the courtroom still echoed in my ears, gavels, shuffling papers, murmurs. But here, only silence pressed against the walls. I set my bag down and walked to the safe. My hands knew the code by memory, each turn of the dial familiar, each click a reassurance. The steel door swung open. Inside, the wooden box waited. I lifted it carefully, as though it might break. The carvings of roses caught the lamplight, shadows deep in every groove. I carried it to the table and sat. For a long time, I simply looked at it. I had won. The court had said so. The papers, the affidavits, the lies, they had crumbled. My name, my money, my freedom were intact. And yet my eyes were dry. No tears of joy, no sobs of relief, only a strange stillness like standing on a battlefield after the smoke clears, the ground littered with remnants. I laid a hand on the box. Its surface was cool, almost indifferent. I fought so hard to protect this. But what have I truly saved? The faces of Julian and Sophie haunted me, their eyes downcast, their mouths set in anger or shame. Winning meant keeping my autonomy, but it also meant losing pieces of them I could never retrieve. I whispered into the empty room, I have my freedom. But do I still have my children? The clock ticked loudly. Midnight approached. I didn't move. I stared at the box until its patterns blurred. I thought of every night I had opened it to slip in another euro. Every morning I had whispered to it as though it were listening. Now it sat before me like a mirror, reflecting not triumph, but the cracks running through my family. I closed my eyes. The silence pressed harder. Still, I could not cry. The tears had burned out during the trial, leaving my eyes dry, my chest hollow. I won, but what remains of me beyond the fractures? Hours passed. The night deepened. At last, I pushed the box aside and stood. My legs felt heavy, but I walked to the kitchen. I filled the kettle, struck a match, lit the flame. The hiss of water boiling was oddly comforting, grounding me in something simple, something mine. When the tea was ready, I poured it into a chipped porcelain cup. I held it between my palms, letting the warmth seep into my skin. For the first time that day, my shoulders eased. I carried the cup to the window and opened it wide. The night air drifted in, cool, fragrant with roses from the garden. I leaned against the sill, sipping slowly. Each swallow left a trail of heat down my throat, thawing the chill inside me. Outside, the sky was deep and starless, but the garden glowed faintly under the moon. The roses stood proud, petals half closed in sleep. I smiled faintly. They didn't care about courtrooms, signatures, betrayals. They only knew water at dawn, sun at noon, rest at night. I breathed deeply. The battle was over. The wounds remained. But here, in this small moment, tea in hand, night air on my skin, I felt the first fragile stirrings of life after war. I won. And though cracks remain, they no longer mean ruin. They mean I am still here. The cafe on Via dei Calzaioli was already humming when I arrived that morning. Students clustered around tiny tables, their sketchbooks open, the smell of espresso threading through the air. I chose a seat by the window. Sunlight spilled across the marble floor, golden and forgiving. The waiter set down my cup with a gentle clink. I wrapped my hands around the porcelain, lifted it, and felt the feather-light weight. Once, a phone heavy with betrayal had nearly broken my wrist. Now, a cup of coffee rested easily in my palms. I took a sip. The bitterness was sharp, clean. My reflection in the glass pane was softer than I remembered, lines deepened but not hollow. For the first time in years, I looked like a woman simply living, not surviving. I had sold the house in Lyon. The roses, the heavy drapes, the rooms where whispers once poisoned the air. I left them behind. The money went not to lawyers, not to endless demands, but to something I chose. A modest apartment above a studio in Florence, where dust smelled of plaster and pigment instead of secrecy. The studio was my sanctuary. I filled it with panes of colored glass stacked like books, brushes lined in jars, sketches pinned on the walls. My students, young, eager, clumsy, brilliant, came each week, their laughter filling the space. Professor Marianne, they called me. The title still startled me, but it settled sweetly on my shoulders. Together, we pieced broken fragments into windows, just as I once pieced my life back from shards. Their hands shook at first, as mine once had. I guided them gently, showing them how to let light pass through cracks until beauty emerged. And in the corner of the room, on a pedestal by the window, stood the wooden box. No longer hidden, no longer a secret burden. I placed it there deliberately, not as a vault, but as a relic, a lesson. Students asked about it, running curious fingers over the carved roses. It held everything I once thought I could lose, I told them. Now it holds nothing but air, and that is enough. Sometimes, when the afternoon light slanted through the glass, the box glowed as though it contained fire. To me, it no longer symbolized chains. It was simply a vessel that had carried me until I could walk on my own. Evenings in Florence were tender. I walked cobbled streets, the smell of bread and basil drifting from kitchens. Music floated from piazzas, violins, accordions, voices raised in joy. No whispers behind curtains, no folded summons in the post. Just life, ordinary and immense. I did not hear from Julian or Sophie often. Sometimes silence is its own verdict. And though the ache remained, an empty seat at the table, a phone that stayed silent, I learned not to press against that wound. Healing meant accepting not every fracture could be mended. Instead, I poured my energy into what I could shape: glass, light, students, mornings with espresso, nights with open windows. One afternoon, a student shattered a panel by mistake. She burst into tears, fragments glittering at her feet. I crouched beside her, picked up a shard, and held it to the sunlight. "Do you see?" I said. "The break makes new patterns possible. Beauty doesn't disappear when something cracks. Sometimes it begins there." Her sobs quieted. She nodded, eyes wide. As she swept the fragments into her hands, I felt my own heart steady. The lesson wasn't just for her. Looking back, I realized my journey had not been about money, nor even the court. It was about silence. For decades, I had swallowed words, believing love was earned through giving, through endurance. In the courtroom, I finally spoke, not to plead, but to exist. And here, in this studio, every shard of glass, every young hand steadying under mine, was proof that my voice had not vanished. I raised my espresso again, tilting it toward the light. The liquid glowed dark and rich. Once, silence had been my cage. Now, silence was simply the space where sunlight pooled. I smiled. I left the old music behind, and I inlaid my own shard of freedom into the window of my life. Thank you for walking with me, all the way to the last crack in my story. You have sat with me in the courtroom's cold light, at the kitchen table's silence, and finally here in Florence with a cup of coffee warm in my hands. I don't tell this to win sympathy. I tell it because silence was once my prison, and words, at last, have become my release. If you have stayed with me until now, it means you've heard not only the wounds, but also the mending. That matters more than you know. So let me ask you something. What will you do if one day you discover that in someone else's eyes you are nothing but a vault with legs, a purse that cries, a safe that breathes? Will you hand over the key because love demands it, or will you turn the lock and guard what is still yours? I cannot answer for you. I can only tell you this. The day I chose to keep something for myself was the day I learned what freedom tastes like. Not sweet, not easy, but real. If my story stirred something in you, if it made you remember your own sacrifices, your own silences, share it. Leave a thought, a word, a fragment of your own journey. Let others know they are not alone in the cracks. And if you wish to hear more stories like mine, follow along. Week by week, shard by shard, I will keep laying pieces of truth into the window we all share. Because every fracture, once lit by sunlight, can turn into color. So tell me, if it were you, would you open the lock for them or close it to keep yourself whole?